Welcome to Envision More. Here, we dig deep into the insights of first-generation wealth builders, unearthing stories of passion, resilience, and relentless vision. Your host is Wayne Wagner Jr., founder of Visionary Wealth Management. So sit back and dig in. It's time to envision more.
Welcome to the Envision More podcast. I'm Wayne Wagner, president of Visionary Wealth Management. I have got my longtime co-host, Trent Booth, president of Visionary Veritas Leadership Group, my bride, May. And then May and I are like fan kids of Melissa and Chris Smith and the work they're doing at Family Brand. And we're just excited and humbled and giddy to have them with us and to dig into all the value that a Family Brand is offering and providing to families really across the country and around the world at this stage. And this is something that we just think needs to be put on steroids, set on fire, and sent globally. So we're just excited to have them here. Chris and Melissa, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we're stoked.
Cool. Very good. As we dig in here a little bit, can you give us maybe a little bit about Family Brand, how it came to be, and what kind of led you guys to create this curriculum?
Yeah, it's such a big story. I will try and condense it down, but Family Brand originally started just something we were doing for our family. Kind of a brief backstory there is Chris and I, we've been married almost 20 years, and at year 4, we found ourselves separated and seriously considering divorce. We had 2 little boys. We had an 18-month-old and a newborn, and our marriage was ending, and we really didn't know what to do. And it was ultimately, we obviously decided to stay together, but we decided that we weren't just going to stay together for the kids, or we were just going to grind through these next 20 years. It was like, no, we want to be married. Like, let's decide to be married and let's create the life that we want. Like, let's create the dream marriage and, this family. Let's live out this vision that we once had for our family. And so it was just the process of like climbing back from that place to where we are today. And a couple other things, contributing to this are, we realized, okay, we want a different narrative for our kids than, struggles in marriage. Chris also has 2 brothers that have passed away due to addiction. And we just felt like, how can we create a narrative for our kids that is different than addiction and, again, troubled marriages? We wanted more for our kids. And so we decided, we took our family through Chris's business process. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's just I have a coaching consulting company called the Possibility Company, and one of the core things that we do is we help entrepreneurs and organizations really understand who they are at a level and a depth that they've never understood who they are, and really create an identity that's profound, that allows them to really stand out in the world by knowing who they are. So I'm doing this work with these entrepreneurs and organizations, and they're saying things to me like, we've never been this clear on who we are. We've never been this clear on what we feel called to do. We've never been this clear on what we stand for in the world. Mm-hmm. And then it just hits me one day. It's like, well, wouldn't I want the same thing for my family? Like, how cool would it be if we as a family were saying, we've never been this clear on who we are. We've never been this clear on what makes us unique. We've never been this clear on what we stand for. And so Melissa's always a great sport with all my entrepreneurial ideas. And I one day was like, hey, we should take our family through my process. Just mostly just kind of for fun, And so we did, and it was a really profound thing. Like, and at this point, our marriage was really good. Like, we'd come out of that place, but always wanting to kind of pursue what's possible. And this has created the belief that Melissa and I talk about often lately is, as a couple and as a family, you're either intentionally growing together or you're accidentally drifting apart. Mm-hmm. There's not a gray area. Like, and I say accidentally because I don't know any couple who wakes up and says, it's a really great strategy for our marriage. Let's accidentally drift apart. But it just can happen so easily. And so, long story short, we do this with our family. We're sitting there one day, and I told Melissa, I'm like, we just branded our family. We just create like a family brand, like you would for a company, but we did it for family. And then I was like, a family brand. And so I bought the domain. Really didn't do anything with it. I would tell people about it. And then when COVID hit, Melissa had this really profound experience. And it was really interesting. Melissa's an RN and had always thought like, hey, when our kids get old enough to go to school, I'll go back to work. And I think
as a nurse.
Yeah, as a nurse. And I think that she shared, I'm telling her story for her, so maybe I should let her tell it. But she said, I watched you pursuing what you felt called to do, but I didn't really feel like nursing was what I felt called to do. It's kind of like what I thought I should do. And so I was like, well, what do I feel called to do? And so Melissa's kind of having this moment where she's in this place of what do I really feel called to do? Do I really want to be a nurse? And she's seeing the struggles that families are having in the world. And she said, you know, she's praying one night and said, well, God, what do you want me to do to build your kingdom? And God was like, build my kingdom by building families. And so she did one of the most courageous things I've ever seen someone do. After a lot of work and sacrifice, she let her nursing license go. It did not renew it on purpose to go like all in. And it was her idea. I get a lot of credit, but it was like, I bought the domain. She's done everything else. She's the one who had the vision for the podcast. She's missed, I think, 2 weekly episodes in 3 years.
Wow.
She's the one that had the vision for our book, which will come out sometime this year. She's created the programs, you know, so really that's the culmination of Family Brand, is our own desire to like strengthen our marriage and help other family couples see what's possible, wanting to create a new narrative for our children. And then just realizing like we do this in companies, like really successful, sustainable companies create an identity. They know who they are and they know what they stand for and they talk about it often. So why wouldn't we do that for families?
So how did Melissa, podcast, a book, all of that kind of, and Chris, you used a word here, calling, that we use a lot. So we talk about some are called, all have a responsibility to stewardship. And so we use that. And those are almost, they're almost biblical or religious thought processes, right? But, you know, and we actively talk about with clients and that kind of thing, that calling is sacred. So, you know, are you called to something? And calling is going to be agnostic of money, agnostic, you know, of maybe even what we would call, you know, financial success or what have you. But it's something that's something just being birthed that you really need to give into and to follow. But if you don't have that, there's the fallback plan, which is being an RN apparently, except that you cut the legs out, Melissa, and threw the backup plan away.
No safety net.
Yeah, no safety net. So how did that, you know, how did you come to that, Melissa? How did that evolve?
Honestly, so one bit of the story that Chris left out is that he loved, like after we developed what we called our family brand, Chris loved talking about it. And we had the opportunity, I don't want to say forced upon us, but we had this opportunity where someone asked Chris, like, basically put him on the spot and was like, in front of a bunch of people, was like, and Chris, you and Melissa are going to host a family brand like retreat, right? And Chris was like, okay. And this was before, you know, any of this. And so we actually had the opportunity, this is in like 2019, to go host a one-day retreat, teaching families like our process. And it was very, like I said, very early, and it's evolved a lot since then, but it was just this, I guess it's just awakening to how much families could like really wanted this type of work and how impactful it was. And so when I had, you know, fast forward again, you know, when I'm praying, like, what can I do? Like, should I keep my license? Should I nursing license, or should I do this family thing? Or maybe it's something else entirely. I think that I had that experience of this work and the impact it can make. And I feel like that maybe just set the stage or the vision for me to see like, okay, wow, if you say, I felt like God was like, this is what I want you to do. And I was like, I had a taste for it enough to be like, okay, yeah, this is really cool. I want to go all in on this, even though I didn't necessarily feel, and I guess that's the thing about a calling, is you don't necessarily feel qualified or capable or ready, but it's like you step into it anyway.
And it was funny because on the plane ride out to San Diego to do this, you know, I'm stoked. I mean, I do stuff like this all the time. Melissa's never done something like this, never publicly spoken, never facilitated. So she's terrified on the way out and like kind of mad at me. Like, what are we doing? Why'd you get us into this?
Thanks, buddy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the flight home, she was like, that was amazing. I want to do more of that, you know, because she just saw the impact. And Yeah. So it's really cool.
You used a phrase there, Melissa, and it prompted something. God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the called.
Mhm.
Right. And so when we follow that calling, that movement that, like God places on our lives to move in a specific direction, then it's up to, and really the opening of the doors and the blossoming and the explosive growth or whatever comes from that is really on Him, not on us. Right. So it's, we're just trying to follow what that calling for each of us. That's amazing. How have you seen it kind of unfold? So I think about you guys, your kids are a little younger and you would have gone through this when they were younger still. It feels like maybe you guys could go do this on your own and then come to the kids and say, hey, this is who we are. We have been doing bits and pieces of this without a playbook, without a roadmap for a
Mhm.
long time. Wagners do big things, Wagners show up for one another, those kinds of things. But our kids are 19 and 22, and so we were,
22.
well, when we were going through Family Brand, though, it was 19 and 22,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
But our kids, in any event, we felt a real responsibility to like engage them in the process. And so it took us a lot longer to get through because it's just hard to get the four of us together. And we included CJ's fiance, Jacob, Jordan in the process, which was an amazing add-on to the conversations. But we felt a responsibility to include them. We felt like, hey, at the end of the day, we're establishing verbiage and vocabulary and purpose and mission and vision that ultimately you have to own longer than we have to own it.
Mhm.
Because we're 50s, early 50s, and we're going to be, according to you guys, we're going to be dead in the next 5 years. So, it's and we're already over the hill and have little to contribute. So we just felt a responsibility to include them in the process. How have you found different families at different stages kind of involving or not involving, and what advice would you have?
I Chris is so kind. Like, I know he has things that he wants to say, but he's being so kind to like allow me the first opportunity to speak. What I would say is I love that you're including your kids. And I think at any age, it's important to include your kids. That's how you get, there's a phrase that we sometimes use that those who help plan the battle don't battle the plan. And so, and of course, that's going to look different for a 19 and a 20-year-old than it's going to look for a 3 or 4-year-old. But I think at any phase, it's important to include the kids in the conversation. And I'm always surprised at how much input a child really does have and how much opinions they're willing to share and to be part of the creation of it. I guess a couple of practical examples would be if you have a 3 or 4-year-old, it would be maybe just giving them options, being like, okay, this is what we have decided, but I want to get your opinion. Do you like this or this kind of a question? And then, with older kids, it's very much like we want you part of the whole conversation. Like, what do you think? What do you want to, what's your input? When we do have a really clear process that we take people through, and it teaches you like how to involve your kids in every phase. And we have worksheets and things that I love getting input from kids on. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I feel like Melissa's done a really beautiful job in the actual program itself. She'll say ahead of time, hey, here's the things I would involve your kids in. Here's the videos I would invite them to. Here's the parts that I don't think they're going to be engaged in. Here's the age appropriateness for these activities. So I think she did a really good job of that. And our biggest recommendation has always been you go through it as a couple or a parent. And that's what's cool. We've had couples with no children go through the program. We've had single parent, mixed families, blended families, empty nesters, like, couples with kids at home. So, but our recommendation is always you go through it and then bring the parts back to them. Right. And look, at a certain age, maybe they'll actually want to watch the videos with you. But that's what we found for sure that works the most effective. And what's cool is there is a part that almost at any age they can really participate in. And that's where Melissa breaks down, based on the research and the science, there's 7 core areas where she really encourages families to create a value in these 7 core categories, all based on this really remarkable research out of the University of Nebraska of actually what makes up strong families. And then in those 7 categories, she gives like 20 ideas for each category. Not that you have to pick one, but just to get your mind, working. Kids love, we've found, looking at those categories and like circling their top 2.
Yeah.
And then you all come back and compare. And I just have one story to share about a friend of mine who is an entrepreneur and took his family through this process. At the time, their 14-year-old son wanted nothing to do with them. Stayed in his room almost all day, every day, very in a little interaction, engagement, no affection physically or through words. Just they were really at a loss, and kept inviting him to participate in the family brand process. He had zero desire. Finally, one night, they nearly forced him to sit on the couch with his other 2 siblings, gave him all the 7 sheets, right, with the 7 categories, and encouraged them to circle their favorites. He only circled 1 potential value in 1 category. So out of 140 potential, he circled 1. And it was under the we talk category. And it was everyone has a voice. And his parents were like,
holy smokes. Yeah.
Yeah. Later they pulled him aside and they're like, hey, why'd you circle that? When he goes, oh, because I don't have a voice in this family.
Oh, wow.
And they were like,
wow.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And it was like led to this amazing breakthrough of how they could show up for him differently. Yeah. And so they chose that value as their family's value. We then hung out with that same family sometime later in Europe on a week vacation. And I was like, this is the kid that didn't have a voice. He's like hanging on his mom the whole time, walking up and hugging his dad. It was like, so the power of this, I mean, that's just one tiny example, but it's pretty remarkable.
A great sense of belonging for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what Melissa really talks about. Like all the values in the world, all the mission statements, all the vision statements in the world, to a degree, won't matter if people don't feel like they belong.
Yeah. Yeah.
In companies too, right?
Yep.
That's everything.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that process of, I mean, and there's things that we can just miss, right? I mean, it's and May and I've got our own stories of times and seasons where we just weren't in tune and aligned with our kids, and then we started doing things a number of years ago of just getting together and asking, establishing some things like, hey, 1 to 10, how we doing? How are we doing? How are you doing? And that gives us 2 real quick check-in markers to let us know, really in less than 5 seconds, whether we really need to have a different conversation.
Anything below a 6, there needs to be a conversation.
Yeah.
Especially if one of our kids is usually a 7 or an 8. If it's a 5 or a 6, then it's time to stop and just sit down and figure out what's going on. But so a couple things. I've been listening to your podcast, and this whole thing has been great for me because we've pretty much done this just kind of like shooting darts in the dark, I think. And our kids are now 20 and 22. And so as I'm going through your podcasts, I'm thinking to myself, I want my kids to do this because I want them to be able to have a framework when they have kids, and I want to participate in that. And so now I'm looking at taking family brand like to the next generational level and acting as potentially a grandparent. There are no grandbabies in our future yet, but maybe in the next decade, I might get a couple. So, and just how to like come beside them as they build their brands and a sense of belonging for their kids, and their voices are heard. One of the episodes that I think really stuck out to me and it was so powerful, you had a child that was struggling learning how to do something, and you would come home and there was just all this negative language around, and I can't even remember which child it was now, but just learning how to do this one thing, and she couldn't do it. And so I think, Chris, you had kind of like a light bulb moment where you were like, the language is wrong. We are going about this totally wrong, and coming from the wrong angle. And as soon as you change the language and lifted up that, child and said, you can do this. We believe in you. We are going to help you and come beside you. And the language changed. It was like the whole family dynamic changed. And so often in my family background, my dad was the optimist, like the glass was always half full. And to a point that it does affect me. Like just the fact that he looked at it that way. When I see something, you know, my kids are like, are you the glasses half full here? And I was like, yes, we got to look at the positive side of this. Language is everything. So I really appreciated that episode. It really stuck out to me. So it's been very helpful just to put a framework around our darts in the dark.
Yeah.
You know, and so much more that we could have done, like if we had done Family Brand 20 years ago.
It is crazy to me, May, and we talk about this all the time. What you're saying is like, in every other area of our life, there seems to be a plan or a framework or a system.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get healthy, tons of frameworks and systems and methods. You want to improve your culture in your company, tons of framework, systems, and methods. You want to get better at marketing. You want like almost everything that's meaningful, except, oh yeah, that whole thing called family that has the most, just go figure it out on your own. Mm-hmm. It's like, for the longest time, there's not a whole lot of playbooks. There's not a whole lot of systems. There's not a whole lot of frameworks, which is just crazy.
And it's worse than that because media and the economy spends billions of dollars advancing at ideologies that may be in violation with our core family values or religious or faith beliefs, and desensitizing our kids so they can sell them crap they don't need, to make them turn them into little, good little employees and consumers. And so, we're, like you said, Chris, we're either intentionally coming together or we're accidentally falling apart. And, we're either intentionally helping our kids move forward with, confidence in who they are and established values and how we show up for one another and how we show up in the world, and calling them to the best versions of themselves, or we're ultimately passively surrendering them to the whims of some marketing executive that wants to sell them, the next pair of jeans or beer or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's and language is a huge part of that. Like to May's point, it's like language creates, and this is something I talk about all the time in the Possibility Company and our consulting, but also Family Brand. It's like language is the fundamental element of creation. Like when people tap into that and when you get that, it's like your life is always an indicator of the language you're using to create it. Mm-hmm. Your marriage is always an indicator of the language you're using to create it. Like, so you want to change your life, change your language. Like, and I think a lot of times we don't even realize we're doing it, but most often our language lives in limitation. We talk a lot about what we don't want, what we don't like, what isn't working. And if we could redirect that energy to what we do want, what we do like, and what is working, what's possible. So not to oversimplify it, but your language is either creating more limitation or it's helping you experience more possibility. And I think that's one of Melissa's most downloaded podcast episodes of all time. It's like podcast number 2. Anyways, we could get you a link to it, but it's
in the beginning.
your words are, how language creates the culture of your home. Like you can't separate it. Like you can't separate your culture from your language, the experience your children are having in your home from the words that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and almost to a fault, right? Because we have seen in the this past 20 or 30 years, we've seen almost an overdoing you can be anything you want, follow your passions, do what you love. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how about do what you're good at, make a living, and then you can figure out how to do what you love. So, and the love will come, the love and the passion will come as you do the things that you're gifted at. But, I'm never going to play pro basketball or football or baseball or soccer or lacrosse or
I think one thing that to like break that, what he's talking about, language and how it creates, just one example of that, a practical example of what that can look like in a family. And I see this happen a lot, but our example that we have in our family is, I remember I had a child who was probably 5 or 6. And by the way, we have 5 kids now. I don't think we mentioned that. One of my kids was little, probably 5 or 6. And I was introducing him to someone as this is my son. And he was kind of hiding behind my legs, not wanting to show his face. And I was like, oh, he's shy. And, I realized I probably introduced him that way several times to different people. And then,
well, I think you even said, as he's shy, he like came in closer to you.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I was like kind of hiding. And then I shortly thereafter heard him describe himself as shy. And in that moment, it just hit me like, that is not who he innately believes himself to be. That's who I have told him that he is. And it just struck me like, oh my gosh, me as a mother and us as parents, like the power of our words and how we are literally creating identity in these people that we are raising. And I don't know, from there on, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to be so cautious and careful about how the words that I am speaking and how I'm speaking life into my children and into my husband and to really anyone that I'm coming in contact with, how powerful language really is.
That's fantastic. Trent, we've kept you silent in the corner down there. And that's atypical for this length, this far into
every once in a while, I'm
man.
gonna be like Ed McMahon, I'm just kind of there on the couch. But I love this conversation, and I'm curious, Chris and Melissa, and perhaps I'll pose the question first to Chris and give Melissa a chance to think about kind of being cleanup hitter this time. Chris, can you think of a story where one of your kids, you've seen them either act or say, right, something that makes you go, oh, wow, this is working. And I'm so glad we did this, as opposed to just hoping things would turn out drifting. Evidence where you've seen the kids where this is getting traction with them.
Oh yeah. Like our, so one of our family values, so there's these 7 core categories in the research. We've actually added an 8th around health, just because that's important to us. So we have a value around what's our value around health and fitness or wellness or whatever. And one that just comes to mind is like our 8-year-old son, Trip, is like really healthy. He's like a consciously healthy eater. Like we take our kids out to eat on their birthday dinner, and Trip always is like, let's go get a salad. Let's go get, an acai bowl.
He ate cucumbers last night for a snack.
Yeah. And it's just like, and to him, it's just like, well, yeah, because Smiths are healthy and active. So like when you acknowledge him, like, oh, Trip, man, that's really healthy. It's like, to him, it's kind of like, well, duh. Like,
of course.
Yeah, of course. Like,
yeah.
And then I remember a story one time when we were living in Hawaii, Melissa, our oldest son, and our middle daughter decided to go out paddleboarding. And this particular place where we'd go paddleboarding on the Haleiwa River, you had to paddle a little bit in the ocean to get to the mouth of the river. And on this particular day, the wind was blowing into the shore, right? So you have to paddle like crazy. And little Ivy's probably 9 at this point, and just paddling her, with all her might and not really going anywhere, making tiny progress. And it was her idea to actually go. She's the one that talked Melissa and our oldest son into going paddleboarding. And she finally just turns to Melissa and is like, this is stupid. I give up. I'm going back in. I'll just wait for you guys at the car. And Melissa's like, Ivy, I'm going to challenge you. Like, you are the one who said you wanted to do this, and you're a Smith. And what do Smiths do? And Ivy looks at her with like this really frustrated look. It was like sighed. She's like, Smiths do hard things. And then just puts her head down and paddles and gets into the mouth of the river.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's small, but like how profound to just be able to remind someone in the moment, like, hey, who are you? I'm a Smith. What do Smiths do? We do hard things. Boom. And so it's just like, and look, there's plenty of times where I forget to do that.
Sure.
And I do the complete opposite of what would be useful. I'm like, stop complaining, just shut up and paddle.
Yeah.
And it's like not useful, right? I get after them. But if I can just remind them of who they are, and that's really when I think of values, not just for a family, for a company, I think we even miss, in my opinion, the purpose of values is not to be like, oh, that's a value. That's what we value. The purpose of values is to reinforce identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is who we are.
Yeah.
And and like not from a place of perfection, but it's like striving to like continue. How can we become more of this? I don't know. Do you think any other stories come to mind?
Yeah, I had a story that happened last week, and I'm feeling emotional about it. I'm like, oh, geez. But
let it out, Melissa. It's a safe place.
So one of our family values is we can talk about anything without judgment. Smiths can talk about anything without judgment. And it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. And that's the funny thing about families. You can talk about things for a long time, but you're like, are these things like working? Are these things like safe? And so I think sometimes these touch points of like that story that Chris said, or the one that I'm about to share, are so amazing to be like, okay, yes, this is resonating. This is working. Like, don't give up, keep going. So the story is my daughter, she was at track, and Chris and I have made it a point, like, we want to talk to our kids about anything like that they might encounter. And we want them to feel like we are a safe place to have conversations. And so we tried to be really open about, your bodies and sex and all those things that we maybe didn't have the opportunity to talk about with our parents, but we want to be the first place where they have these conversations. So my daughter calls me on the phone and she says, Mom, I'm at track and my friend, she just started her period and we don't know what to do. Can you come and help us? And I was like, so grateful in that moment. Like, there's a bunch of girls there, but Ivy was like taking charge. She's like, give me the phone. I'm going to call my mom. I know that we can talk to her about this and she will help us. And I just felt, again, to me, like, oh my gosh, like these values that we're instilling, they're really becoming like part of our family and part of who we are. And she believes it and knows it deeply that we can talk about anything in our family.
Yeah, it was interesting. Even the little girl who it happened to didn't feel comfortable, like calling maybe even. But yeah, that was just like, oh, Ivy's like, we got this. Like, my mom will know what to do.
Yeah, it wasn't even a thing for her. It was just like, oh, give me the phone. I'm going to call my mom. But for me, I was like, it was such a great mom moment for me.
Absolutely.
And we also have plenty of evidences of times where it's like, we probably have way more stories of times it's like, wait, is any of this in? We've been saying for 5 years. Is anyone getting this?
So when you have these moments, you're like, yes.
Well, here's something, an area of this that I think that it's helped me is a high Enneagram 8. Words of affirmation are just not part of my daily operating routine. I'm terrible at it. And it's, and Trent, you point out I can stop telling the joke, but I can also, there's things I need to start doing, and which is, verbally affirming people. But what it's helped me is to be more, when I go into a situation with my family, when I'm clear about how we're showing up. We had a situation where CJ and Jacob have a house. They're doing some work on it. There's going to be a work day. Bryce has worked 60, 70 hours during the 5 days of the week. And we're coming into Saturday. It's the only day he's going to have off. And he's got, and he's jamming and he wants to spend time with Trent's son, Jake, and do some guy stuff. And I just said, hey, tomorrow, at 8:30, we're getting over to, CJ and Jacobs and doing work. And he shows up and he helps us haul drywall out of the basement that had been flooded. And, helps us carry like 96 sheets of drywall down the steps into the basement and all this kind of stuff. And he's just there. And then it was just so clear a reminder. Hey, Bryce, you are living up to Wagner's show up for one another. Like that's one of our values, and you're living it today, and you're living it when it wasn't easy and when you had other options and you could have easily said no. But I just want to thank you. And so as a guy who doesn't regularly do it, I'm finding myself, being able to, it's helping me show up better as somebody I want to be. I want to be someone who verbally affirms. It's just not part of my regular makeup. So I have found that having that language, having that vocabulary is actually helping me show up like more the guy I want to show up as.
That's a really beautiful story, Wayne. And it's like, if values can be used to reinforce identity in a couple ways. One, when someone's not being who they could be, or it can be a reminder of like, hey, Smiths are kind. Like, are you being kind?
Yeah.
And I think that's the one that maybe that'd be useful instead of just getting after my kids, be like, hey, stop bothering each other. If I can remind them of who we are, and even more powerfully, if I can catch them being it and acknowledge it, which is, I think, comes the least natural to most of us. Because look at the way our minds are hardwired is our minds are hardwired to look for things that aren't working because our mind's trying to keep us safe.
Right.
But if we're not careful, that also turns us into a really critical leader, or parent.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it takes work to catch people doing good. It takes work to catch people being a demonstration. And man, that goes so far to like, hey, I just want to acknowledge you. Like you're being it, man. You're doing it. Like when we say Wagner show up for each other, you're like the epitome of that. That's like, means the world to people. Like, so, you know, to them, it feels like they're winning an Oscar, truly, you know?
Yeah.
Now, Chris and Melissa, I love how you guys both, I think, are holding a really high example for most of us to be able to follow and celebrate. But I also love your vulnerability to share where you're still struggling, still working. And in fact, it for me makes it so much easier to recommend Family Brand, because even if we're doing okay in certain areas, most of us are keenly aware of where we're missing.
Mhm.
And I love that about you too. And I also want to affirm, you know, Melissa, you might not know this, but Chris and I, we met in Tahoe, and I'm a coach trying to break into the space that Chris has occupied for a while and achieved quite a bit of success in. And Chris went out of his way to pursue me. He was pursuing me, the junior guy, to try and get some time and just to get to know me a little bit, and not looking to sell me anything. Or I got a lot of that. I know you guys, I'm sure, do when you host a podcast. A lot of people looking to give you all kinds of ideas on SEO and ways to kill leads, etc. But I wanted to celebrate for a moment the fact that you guys are so successful and yet still green and growing and very humble and very curious. I would love to hear if you'd be willing to share what some of those core values are. You've shared a few of them already. You've got 7, even 8 areas now. What are some of the things that Chris and Melissa, and now the whole Smith family, Team Smith, what are some of the terms that you guys use for core values?
Yeah, so we actually have one identical to Wagner. Smiths show up for each other. Smiths can be counted on. You know, Smiths are children of God and divine beings. Smiths are friends and adventure together. Smiths are healthy and active. Smiths can talk about anything without judgment. You know, and so it's just like, again, and here's another thing. What's so cool about, I believe, the way Melissa structured the 7 categories and the possible 8th, if you want to have health, if you really think about it, the 8 categories are the core values. And so we've branded those 8 categories because they were very clinical sounding in the research. So the 8 categories are like, we prioritize, because the research was really clear that strong families prioritize family. But if you think about we prioritize, that is a core value. However, how each family decides to express that can be totally unique to them. And it can evolve. Like, we prioritize when you have 3 and 4-year-olds, maybe like we wrestle a lot. That may be your family value around prioritizing family. Then as they get older, and that's what's been really fun to see our own values evolve. Like, another one of the core categories is we bond, because the research showed that strong families, now this one is really interesting. Strong families spend, and this was the exact quote out of the research, quality time in great quantities. And a lot of times we trade those off as a justification. I did before as an entrepreneur. I don't spend a lot of time with my family, but man, when I do, it's quality. And the research is really clear that it's like, no, it's quality time in great quantities.
Yeah.
So like when your kids are little, though, we bond might be like, Smiths don't hit. that might be your core value as a family when your kids are little, right? That's how we bond. Like, don't hit each other. And then as you get older,
Wagners don't bite.
I was thinking the same thing.
So now though, our kids are a bit older, and look, it's a magical experience. And Wayne and May, you probably experienced this. The first time your little kids could like carry their own backpack and roll their own suitcase through the airport, you're like, boom, okay, all new possibilities opened up. So like last summer, we went to Europe for 6 weeks. We're going again this, you know, so we've gone on a lot of adventures. So now our value under We Bond is Smiths are friends and adventure together. So we're never going to not have those 8 core values, but the way we express them will evolve. And I think my opinion is that's the most useful way to do it in a company too. I think a lot of times as companies, we develop like kind of more static core values, which is fine. It's better to have them than not. But I actually think that you could have core values as a company, but then how are we currently expressing them based on the needs of our family or our company most? And that allows you to kind of keep a pulse on it. And so we revisit all 8 values every year. We don't make a lot of changes, but hey, if there's something really calling to our family or something we could focus on, yeah, we're not afraid to swap one out in that category in service to our family at that time.
So it sounds like the core value may remain. How it manifests or how we celebrate it, that evolves over time. What an outstanding insight. I love that.
Mhm.
Well,
Friends,
I would add, if we're reviewing them every year and updating them every year, then there's new and fresh buy-in every year. And so, and May and I have been we meet annually for 3 days. We meet, middle of the year. We have monthly, dinner meetings where we get into stuff. But the beginning of the year, we ask the kids, are you in for another year? And as we just ask them that, hey, do you want to be part of the family of businesses that we're building, the stewardship that we're expressing, what we're building together? Are you committing to be part of this for another year? And so every year there's got to be verbal, yes, I'm in, from them. And so, so incorporating the family brand values into that conversation gives us a context to say it's not just you're going to be part of it, but you're agreeing to show up in these ways. And it's now shared vocabulary and shared values that we can hold one another accountable to and praise each other in. So.
Yeah, I love that. I love that question, by the way. I want to start asking my kids that even now. I don't know what I would do if my 7-year-old was like, no. I'm out.
I'm out.
but just like, are you in on this family for another year? Like, because I think a lot of times too, we miss that with clients or team members.
Mhm.
We think that the enrollment is a one-time thing, or like in a marriage. It's like, no, you enroll and then you re-enroll and you re-enroll and you re-enroll and you re-up, So like, I love that idea. Like, hey, are you in for another year? Like, are you in for,
And I feel
awesome.
like that space gives freedom to like, of course it does, but I just reminded me of a story with Chris and I when we were separated. I had an appointment, I guess you would call him a coach, and he was like, you're not stuck in the marriage. Like, you can get out. And of course I knew that, but just hearing that from him just had me realize like the power of like choosing to stay. Like, that felt way more than like I have to be here or anything like that. It's like, no, we are choosing to be all in and choosing to stay. It reminds me of that, by incorporating that with your kids as well is really cool.
That's great.
Well, I know we're getting close to the end of our time.
Yeah.
I know Wayne's got one last question here for you. My question would be, where can people find you if they want to deep dive into family brand? Where are we going?
Yeah, go to familybrand.com. And I always like to send people we have a quiz on our website, familybrand.com/quiz. And we call it a family culture quiz. So it'll ask you questions about your family culture, and then it'll spit you out like, okay, this is a place where you could like focus in to improve your family culture.
Yeah, it's an amazing resource that Melissa built, and families will tell like, man, they're like, I got a ton of insight just answering the questions, and then it's not meant to design. It's not designed to be like, oh, and here's where you're really struggling and failing. It's like, you're doing great, and here's some ideas of what's possible based on how you scored.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's so easy, like you alluded to earlier, trying to feel so deeply and recognize all the places where you're not measuring up or where you could be doing better. So it's always really important to us that families feel just that it's not like you're terrible, but it's more like what's possible for your family and looking forward.
We're in progress. How about that? I just love everything that you guys are sharing, and it's so sustainable and beautiful. Thank you. If I didn't say a thing today, I'm just glad I got to see this live. Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, so we always ask one last question, and that's what does envision more mean to the Smiths? So when we make that comment, what does envision more mean to you?
Well, first of all, I love that name, and I just love the whole idea behind envision more. I'll share from the perspective of what I always talk about at the Possibility Company, which is, we believe that possibility exists, but limitation is created. So when you think about that, when you look out in the world, the only thing that exists is possibility. And it's never going to not exist, and it hasn't ever not existed. Like, there's nothing you or I could do to stop possibility from existing as a universal truth. We can limit it for ourselves, but it's always there. But when you look out in the world, limitation does not exist until you create it. Sadly, we often create it in our language and our thinking. Yeah. And so when I think about envision more, it's like envision more because there always is more. There's always more that's possible. And not from a place of like, I got to have more and have more. It's like, no, envision more from a place of like love, possibility, freedom, And I always kind of talk about it like it's a mountain with no top. You know, we just get further up the mountain, and the view becomes more beautiful. The scenery becomes, you know, our vision becomes more clear. So yeah, I love Envision More.
That's great.
What I would add would be, you know, it's easy for me to want to go to like all these things that we want to do, but I think that I always am reminding myself like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? And we're like, I want it for my kids. Like I want to envision more for my family. And is that where like my first priority is always lying, is with them and my stewardship over them. And so this year Envision More for us looks like we are building a house together, and we're really excited about that. And also in a broader sense, like if everyone had that vision, like their stewardship was here, like with their families, like that then creates like stronger cities, creates stronger towns, creates stronger, you know, states, and a stronger world. But it all can start by each person envisioning more in just their homes for the people that they're have the stewardship over.
That's amazing. Almost really ending where we began, where we asked where Family Brand started, and it was the idea that, you know, build families and you'll build a better world. So thank you so much for being with us here on the Envision More podcast, Chris and Melissa. A, you're welcome back anytime you want to spend an hour with us. And B, we you know, I know Chris, I'd love to tag you to come do another episode and talk about the Possibility Company and some of the things you're doing on that side as well. So thank you guys so much. We're grateful for the benefit and the value you've added to our family through your investment in creating this curriculum. And if you haven't figured it out yet, we would strongly advocate your family as listeners, like going to envisionmore.com, sure, and going to familybrand.com and signing up and going through this curriculum and seeing how it changes how your family communicates and the vocabulary and speaking possibility into existence within your area of greatest stewardship, which is our families. So thank you again, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Envision More podcast with Wayne Wagner Jr. of Visionary Wealth Management. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by the conversation today. If you want to dig deeper into the show notes or Wayne's work at Visionary, you can find us at envisionmore.com. That's Envision with a Z. Advisory services are provided through Wealth Plan Investment Management. Wealth Plan Investment Management and Visionary Wealth Management are separate entities. The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Thanks for listening.